But yeah, man, glad to finally meet you. Nikki, our producer, she talked about you a lot. I did some research on you too. So I mean, just for starters, like, how did you get your start off? Writing and covering the Niners.
Yeah, man. I just kind of jumped into it. So, been a huge Niner fan my whole life, and I used to have a podcast, just an audio podcast, back in like 2016 to 2018 time frame. And then Grant Cohn, I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he covers the 49ers through Sports Illustrated. Saw that he had a YouTube channel and he was taking calls one day. So I jumped backstage on one of his YouTube calls and then realized the software that he was using was called StreamYard. So I just started doing my research on StreamYard and how it integrated with YouTube. And so I just was like, well, shit, this is the time. So let me jump in and start a video podcast. Did that, ran with that for a little bit, connected with Grant, and he kind of brought me on as a writer, and things just kind of went from there. So that's kind of how I got into it.
Sweet. Was it like what was kind of the driving force just behind the Niners? Was that like a hometown team? Is that just something you were drawn to?
No, man, I've been in so I grew up in Portland, Oregon, and my dad was a 49er fan. He was from the California area, and that's just what happens. I mean, I feel like I feel like when your dad or parents or family members root for a team, you either end up rooting for them or you root against them. Like there's no in between. You either love them or
Yeah.
hate them usually. And so for me, I ended up falling in love with the Niners. My earliest memory of rooting for the 49ers was I was about 5, maybe 6 years old, and the Kansas City Chiefs were playing. I was actually rooting for the Kansas City Chiefs, thinking that was the 49ers because they wore red. And my dad corrected me, like, no, that's not the 49ers, and kind of explaining things to me. And so from that point on, I've been a 49er fan.
Sweet. Yeah, I grew up a Raiders fan. It's like my family's from East Oakland.
Yeah.
Granddad grew up in West Oakland. Like he tried out for the Raiders. Like he was cool with some of the Raiders players. So it's kind of like both teams are kind of ingrained in my family. But then when the Raiders moved, a lot of people became Niners fans.
That's what I was going to ask you. What happened for you when the Raiders moved? When they went to Vegas, like what was your thoughts? You still I got to imagine like you grow up a fan of a specific team forever. Just because they move cities doesn't mean that you just stop repping them, right? Like I don't know. How did that work for you?
Yeah, it was for me. It was nothing but the Raiders.
Yeah.
Um, and because like they lost on my sister's birthday in that Super Bowl in Vegas.
Oh man.
My sister like stopped watching football for like 10 years. She didn't start watching football until like I started playing in high school.
Mm,
Because of that. But yeah, it was never really an issue of not being. I almost actually stopped being a Raiders fan for like a year when they traded Khalil Mack. I
yeah.
was like, I'm fuck it, I'm just gonna be a Rams fan for the year. Then they lost, and I was like, you know what? If I'm gonna be with a loser, let me be with a loser I like.
You tried it. You definitely tried it. The grass is not always greener. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I'm like, I felt like as I like to say it, because a lot of Rams fans gave me grief. I was like, I was in my fan hoe phase.
Yeah, yeah. I
You get a
feel
hoe
it.
phase.
I feel it. I definitely feel it. I like it.
And like my reasons were is like imagine like somebody cheating on you constantly and just
Hmm.
making horrible choices
Yeah,
and you just have enough one day. And that's how I
yeah,
feel with the Raiders. It's like another screw up, another horrible draft class, another bad deal, the index card game. Like it was always something just being a Raiders fan, knowing like, okay, it's not if fuckery is gonna happen, it's when.
yeah. You
So
you
that was
got
kind of
tired of
life.
being a Raider cuck, so you moved on and went to a new team. I feel it.
Yeah, and it got to the point where I was like, man, my mom couldn't even stomach. She couldn't even watch it. She felt like Eric Dickerson. Like I can't turn this off. I can't watch this anymore.
Eric Dickerson. Now that's a name. That's a hell of a running back right there. Probably,
I'm saying.
probably one of the least talked about best players of all time, right there.
I'd say unappreciated.
Yeah, majorly underappreciated because you talk running back. The names that always come up are going to be Sweetness, Barry, Jim Brown, obviously, rest his soul. And, you might hear Emmitt Smith. OJ's obviously going to make his way in there for the wrong reasons. You're going to hear guys like Herschel Walker. I feel like Dickerson's one of those guys that doesn't get mentioned, but is easily a top 5 running back of all time. No doubt about it.
Yeah. I mean, he still owns the rushing record.
Yeah. I mean, he's
Like,
that deal.
I don't think Henry's going to break it. I mean, he kind of had his chance.
Yeah.
And AP should have broken it.
Yeah. Yeah. AP's another one people bring up, right? Obviously, AP had his time in the limelight, no doubt about it. But yeah, man, Eric Dickerson, I think he's maybe the 3rd best running back of all time.
I would go AP, LT, Dickerson. Like the three of them, they're never properly placed.
Yeah.
I don't even think Emmett's the greatest just because he's the all-time
No.
leader. It's kind of like if you put LT in that offense, what does he do? If you put Chris Johnson in there, if you just put different players in that offense, they're all going to eat. But if you put Emmitt Smith on, let's say, the Houston Oilers, is he still the all-time leading rusher? Probably not.
Probably not. Probably not. Emmitt, I will say this about Emmitt. So I was doing top 7 running backs of all time. This was like 2 years ago. And I really went into that list thinking I'm easily finding 7 running backs better than Emmitt. I couldn't do it. I think I put him at 7. I mean, he started to really break down the numbers. Even when he was an old man and went and played for Arizona, he was still able to get up over 1,000. It's like, all right, you got to give him his props. He had a hell of a career. But I think I had him at 7. I want to say I had Jim Brown, Barry Sanders. They were like both number 1A. Then it was Dickerson. Then it was Sweetness. Then it was LT. I can't remember the full list, but I'm pretty sure it went something like that. And then Emmitt, I had at number 7.
Plus, you got Marshall Faulk.
Yeah, Marshall Faulk. See, that you're talking about a whole different level there. Like Roger Craig got 1,000 and 1,000. Marshall Faulk got 1,000 and 1,000. CMC's gotten 1,000 and 1,000. LT got 100 receptions in a season, if I remember correctly. So yeah, I mean, you've got just crazy stuff happening for some of these guys. Unfortunate thing is, most likely, I don't know. It's interesting. There's been this transition over the last 10 years where running backs aren't coveted. There's not a lot of bell cows, but it almost seems like you're starting to transition back, not from a draft standpoint or a pay standpoint, but from a bell cow standpoint. We're starting to see, hey, there's a clear back here. Yes, there can be a spell guy, but we've 90% of our touches are going to go to this one back. You're starting to kind of see it transition back that way. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with the league over the next few years when it comes to the running back position.
Yeah, because apparently there was like a stat that came out that like Bijan Robinson is going to make like 13 or 4, I think like $13.8 million this year, more than any other running back. And I mean, it's kind of like if quarterback is overvalued grossly, that's kind of where the money went for running backs. It's the quarterbacks.
Yep.
Everybody else gets paid. Like you got tight ends. Tight ends kind of damn near get paid more. Like kickers and punters are the only people who have like cheaper tags than the running backs. But I mean, that's why when I look at CMC, I'm like, he could be 1,000-yard receiver.
Oh yeah.
But I don't know how much longer he's playing running back. I don't think you run a guy like that into the ground. And if you look at it, if he played receiver, you have 3 number 1 receivers and 2 guys who can play running back, which is insane.
Yeah, it's true. It's definitely true. I mean, oddly enough, I would say that CMC is a better receiver than Debo, and
Yeah.
physicality wise, Debo's more physical than CMC is. So he almost could be the better running back. Really, if you break it down, it's insane.
And that's kind of crazy. Like, obviously, McGlinchey left, and to be honest, I don't think they're going to miss him too much. But Trent Williams, he makes that O line go, and Kittle's blocking. But I don't know how much longer Kittle can stay because you still have to pay Bosa. And let's say if Drake Jackson becomes something special, you might have to pay him. You got Armstead. Like, the cost is going to eventually come due. And then eventually you're going to have to decide, okay, do I want to honor Trey Lance's 5th-year option? Like, just that whole quarterback situation. What's your take on? Is it more important to take care of some of those veteran guys or just be stable at quarterback?
I mean, I think if you have a clear choice, you have to go elite quarterback. You would prefer to have an elite quarterback that makes a lot of money, because elite quarterback play is what wins in the league. 43 of 57 Super Bowls have been won by Hall of Fame caliber quarterbacks. Yeah, you've got the rare look at like a Trent Dilfer winning it with the greatest defense arguably of all time. You've got guys like Foles that have won it, Flacco. But when you go look at those playoff runs from Foles and Flacco, they were elite for a playoff run. I mean, elite. You go look at the numbers from those guys. They were the best quarterbacks in those playoff runs. So you either need an elite quarterback or somebody to think they're elite for a playoff run. And when you look at the 49ers, there's a lot of questions there. And those questions have allowed them, to your point, to pay a lot of these guys right now. But not only is it a money thing that you brought up, but it's starting to be an age thing. CMC, how much longer can he go? Shanahan doesn't seem to want to let off the gas pedal there. He's going to continue to run him into the ground. That's the way he does with running backs. He rides the hot hand. CMC is always going to stay hot. So how many touches does he get? How many years does he have left? George Kittle has missed multiple games for many years in a row. He plays a physical brand of football. You look at Rob Gronkowski and how his career was cut short. Kittle's very similar in that manner, the way that they play football. Debo Samuel, even though he's only been in the league a few years, he's older. He's about to be 27 years old. He's older than a lot of these receivers that have been doing it a lot longer. So age is starting to become a factor along with being paid. They went and got Javon Hargrave in the offseason. He also is up over 30. Armstead's hitting that 30 age. So this window is closing very quickly in San Francisco with the current characters. And then the question becomes, can one of these quarterbacks emerge? And if they do emerge, are you in a situation where you have to pay them big quarterback money without necessarily knowing if they've got big quarterback play, and then reliving the situation that you just went through with Jimmy Garoppolo, where there wasn't a better option? You knew you could win with this guy, and it ends up being fool's gold, and it's just not enough to get over the hump. I don't know. San Francisco's in a really, really tough situation this year. And not only are they trying to win a Super Bowl before this window closes, but they're also trying to figure out if they have a franchise quarterback. And I think it's very hard to do both at the same time. So they've got a tall task this season, no doubt about it.
And when you look at like this QB class next year is going to be loaded. I cover the Pac-12, and you got at least 5 guys who look like NFL guys. We already know, Caleb Williams. Shadur Sanders is kind of still up in the air. Like, yeah, he did great at Jackson State, but this isn't, the HBCU level of football. Like, this is Pac-12 D1. Even though, I mean, they say he was a consensus 4-star recruit, but he really wasn't. He was like if you could give him a rating, it would be like 3.8. But
Mm-hmm.
most places consider him a 4-star QB, and like he had that ability. But you got DJ Ukulele. He's got drafted by the Dodgers. You got Bo Nix, who I'm not really high on. I don't trust it because he's very turnover prone. And yeah, he's good with his legs, but that's not really gonna fly at the next level when it comes to arm talent and just pocket passes. Like Michael Penix Jr. is a stud. I would say he's the best deep ball thrower in the draft. Caleb still has some things he needs to clean up because there's times, especially where I've seen him throw it deep and he was late on the throw. Like the receiver had the guy beat, but he's running around scrambling. And it's like you should have like 70, 80-yard bombs because those receivers, especially Brandon Rice, he was getting open. So I think quarterback wise, even if none of these guys works out, I don't know if they're going to find their way back into the first round, they're going to have to trade somebody. And I think if they can't pay Bosa, I could see them trading somebody off. But I don't think you can trade Bosa.
No, I think the ship has sailed for Bosa. If you were going to trade Bosa, it would have been this offseason, and it would have been for somebody like Lamar Jackson when he was having his contractual issues with the Ravens. Bosa's going to get paid. He's going to be extended here within the next 3 weeks. So Bosa's going to be here. Like I said, I think for the 49ers contractually, it's not that big of an issue because Eric Armstead after this year, if they want to move on from him, they have an out. They have an out after next year with Debo. So they have outs in these contracts, but at some point, you spend 3 first-round picks on Trey Lance. Whether he works out or not, restocking those shelves becomes very hard when you don't have those first-round picks for so many years. And same thing with CMC. CMC's a great player, but then they spent a second and a third rounder on him as well. So eventually these not having these picks can catch up to you. And when you're trying to restock the cupboard with a lot of really good players that are aging, we didn't even talk about, you talked about Trent Williams and being a hell of a player, but then talk about Trent Williams and how he almost retired this offseason, or there was potential talk of him retiring. So he's getting close as well. There's a lot of talent that the 49ers are going to have to figure out how they can replace on the fly here. Now, I do believe in the front office. I think it's something they can do, but really it's all for naught if you don't have the quarterback. And let's be honest, we can talk about the rookie quarterback route, but if Kirk Cousins is available and Kyle Shanahan doesn't feel like any of these guys are it, Kirk Cousins would be a San Francisco 49er, would be my guess.
I believe that's actually, he's literally perfect for their offense. But with Shanahan, like, how much time do you think he has left? Because at the height of his assistant career, the Falcons choke in that Super Bowl. He still gets a head coaching job, and his offense has kind of come up short in big games. Like, how much more slack do you give a guy like that?
Oh, make sure you don't play this for 49er fans because they want to give him the longest leash in the world and give him a forever contract. They think they've got an offensive genius on their hands, and he's good. Don't get me wrong. Shanahan is really good. I wanted him to be the 49ers head coach going into that offseason. I think they made the right decision there. Kyle Shanahan, from a play caller perspective, top 2 in the league. Sitting right behind Andy Reid, in my opinion. From a head coach perspective, he's done a great job developing his assistant coaches. He's done a great job developing late round picks, but he either can't evaluate quarterbacks or can't develop quarterbacks. Either way, he can't get a franchise quarterback, it seems. And that certainly could hold him back from winning a Super Bowl. I think 49er fans will continue to be patient with him as long as he wins. It would probably take back-to-back seasons not making the playoffs if he were to actually get fired, or his contract running out and him wanting to leave. Otherwise, it truly is probably a Marvin Lewis situation where he could be here for 15 years without winning a ring. So I think Shanahan has as much time as he wants. And fortunately for him, the Yorks have not done a good job in past relationships with coaches and GMs. And because of that, they're a little bit gun shy. When you go through guys like Jim Tomzula and Singletary and Chip Kelly, and then
Nolan.
you get a gem like Kyle Shanahan, you're going to give him a longer leash than maybe a lot of other franchises would.
Good point. Because I feel like Philly obviously is reloading. Um,
Philly's done a great job, by the way. Kudos to Philly. Their front office is incredible. The way that they've reloaded is what 49er fans should hope the 49ers can do when it comes to restocking, reloading, and re-upping. They've done a great job in Philadelphia.
I mean, you look at that, the NFC, realistically, all roads go through Philly to get to the Super Bowl.
Yep.
But how much of a threat does this Niners team pose to a Philly, or even, dare I say it, to the Chiefs to even get to and win a Super Bowl?
Man, that's the ultimate question. You look at the San Francisco 49ers and you take away a quarterback position from all rosters in the league, and that might be the best roster in the NFL. Problem is, quarterback really offsets a lot. There was, I don't remember if it was ESPN or CBS or who put this together, but they put together their top rosters in the league, and they had Kansas City number one. There's only one reason for that. It's Patrick Mahomes. You look at the rest of that roster, it doesn't hold a candle to teams like Philly, Cincy, San Francisco, hell, even Dallas. But you add in Patrick Mahomes, and he's the great equalizer. And so the 49ers don't have the benefit of that. In fact, I would argue the two most important positions in football would be quarterback and then the offensive line group. And I think those are probably the two biggest question marks for the San Francisco 49ers headed into this season. Contrast, you look at the Philadelphia Eagles. Hurts, we'll see. I think that Hurts obviously had a hell of a season, could have been the MVP, and he might be on his way to being a bona fide top 7 guy in this league. But it's only been 1 year. I would like to see it for another before I crown him fully. But I definitely feel a lot more comfortable if I'm a Philadelphia Eagles fan in that quarterback situation versus what the San Francisco 49ers have. And then they've got the best offensive line in football. So those two things right there are going to keep them competitive. We'll see what the Super Bowl hangover looks like. But you would imagine that Philadelphia should be the favorites to win the NFC. Now, the 49ers and Eagles play in Week 13 in Philadelphia. It's Week 12 or Week 13. Curious to see how that matchup plays out. And I think the 49ers player for player certainly match up, but it's going to come down to the quarterback position. Can one of these guys emerge, and will it be enough to win some of these games? It's not. The thing is that the 49ers are so talented. There's a lot of quarterbacks that can keep things afloat, but inevitably you're going to run into a buzzsaw that is cutting through your defense like a hot butter through knife, and you're going to have to win in these shootouts. And I don't know if the 49ers have the quarterback on this roster to make that happen.
Fair. And when it comes to obviously the future is pretty bright for any team with a young quarterback. But when you look at this team, obviously outside of who could step up at quarterback, like what position group or what player do you see taking the next step for the Niners?
Man, last year it was Talanoa Hufanga. Became an all-pro out of nowhere. I would also argue that Aaron Banks, our left guard, who he really struggled to get on the field in the first year in the NFL. And last year, he took a huge step forward. He might be a Pro Bowler this year. I don't know who for sure the player is going to be, but I think the 49ers would like it to be Drake Jackson. I think he's the guy that they probably need most to take that step forward. They need somebody opposite of Nick Bosa. And Drake Jackson, from an athletic profile, certainly checks all the boxes. But going into year 2, he's going to have to figure out how to play in this league. He talked about it last year. Shanahan talked about it last year, about how he faded down the stretch, clearly wasn't ready for an NFL season. They essentially had to shut him down towards the tail end of the season because physically he wasn't ready to go through that grueling of a season. And he's talked about how he has lost some body fat. He's put on some muscle. He feels ready to go for this season. And he's ready to be that guy opposite of Bosa. Time will tell. Luckily for him, he's got Armstead in the middle. He's got Hargrave in the middle. And he's got Bosa. So he's probably not ever going to have to deal with any double teams. Can he just beat the guy in front of him? Can he develop? The 49ers have the best defensive line coach in the league in Chris Kocurek. So if Chris Kocurek can't get the best out of a Drake Jackson, then nobody can. I would expect that he takes a step forward. How big of a step? That's going to be on him. But if the 49ers could choose one person to take that leap, I would imagine he would be that guy.
Indeed. That's going to be interesting because, I mean, coming out of SC, I talked to him at his pro day. He was like, I could run 4.4. And I looked at him and I was like, yeah, based off his get off and his explosiveness, I could see a 4.4.
The man does handsprings and backflips in practice. He's very athletic.
Yeah, freak of nature, and he's super young. I think he's not even 22 yet.
Yeah, he is young.
But yeah, so you also, you cover UFC. What was your thoughts on the Hall of Fame induction ceremony?
I like what the UFC is doing. I like, first of all, Jose Aldo. Super happy for him. Jose Aldo is a guy who I met it's probably 2011. Not a nicer guy. You can't find a nicer guy. Extremely humble, family oriented, and a hell of a fighter. I was very excited to see him get inducted in the Hall of Fame. Obviously, Anderson Silva, well beyond deserving. I mean, that might be the most gifted fighter of all time. Not the greatest, but the most gifted fighter of all time is probably Anderson Silva. What he did to Rich Franklin when he won that middleweight belt initially and then showed he could do it again, absolutely incredible. So, yeah, I love what the UFC is doing with their Hall of Fame in general. And I like that they were able to get past some of the personal stuff and bringing Anderson Silva in. And then obviously, like I said, Jose Aldo was more than deserving.
Yeah, because it was tripped. Like Cowboy Cerrone talked about how much he made in his career, and everybody was shocked. Like, bro, you practically made nothing. And you fought for so long.
Yeah.
But I feel like that's kind of going to change in this new era. Like, talk about Silva being, the most gifted. Where does John Jones rank?
Oh.
And do you count his victories against Cormier?
That's tough. I'm a huge Cormier fan. And as much as I would love to discredit John Jones for those wins because of picograms and whatever else was going on there, even Daniel Cormier admits, listen, if he was start clean, he's just a better fighter than I am. And I have to go with Daniel Cormier there. Daniel Cormier was a hell of a fighter in his own right. John Jones, the steroid allegations, they're going to follow him forever. I think it's tough to say that somebody like that is the best all time, but I don't know. I mean, who else do you make an argument for? I mean, sure, GSP had a hell of a run, obviously, won multiple belts. Khabib was undefeated, but he never made a run in an era, by the way, where you should try to go after multiple belts, go through multiple weight classes. He never chose to go that path. I got to say, Alexander Volkanovski's not far off, man. If he can go capture that lightweight belt against Islam and then round out a couple more fights and finish those with wins, you might start to talk about him as the greatest fighter of all time. I mean, he's literally fought every tough fight he could fight and seemingly somehow looks better with age each fight out. Every time you think there's somebody in front of him that should beat him or challenge him, he's doing what John Jones was doing 8 years ago, 10 years ago, and beating them at their own fight. So, yeah, man, I don't know. I think Volk's getting close. I think he's getting close as well.
Yeah, because with Jones, it's interesting because I mean, he said the levels that were in my system, back then is legal now.
Mm-hmm.
So does that mean I cheated? And even if I did some cocaine, who was whooping me in a fight?
Well, yeah, that's not the performance enhancer, right? I think the problem with John Jones is, if you follow the story closely, there was a time where USADA came into the gym and he hid under the cage for multiple hours avoiding a piss test. And if you believe that to be true, that's where you add in the picograms. Obviously, listen, marijuana, cocaine, those are recreational drugs. I'm not going to knock him for that. But there were steroid things allegedly in his system, performance enhancers in his system. And then when you avoid taking a test and hide under the cage to do so, allegedly, that doesn't bode well for you either. So I don't know.
Yeah, I feel that because I mean, it's kind of like, dude, you ruined your own hype train. Like your character made your most ardent fan. When Dana White is disappointed in you,
Right.
like, come on. Like nobody even talks about the fact that he beat up his wife and on camera.
Right.
Like we just
Right.
ignore that. And he comes out, and then there are allegations in the last press conference where like Dana White, it looks like he's high strung. He's on like some Adam Gase or whatever, and it's like maybe. I mean, shit, how long has he been running UFC? Like,
Oh,
you got the fights in Saudi Arabia. They have the whole Fight Island. Like, for a guy who, yeah, has done some crummy stuff, when he's going to bat for John Jones and heartbroken by what you're doing, it's like, come on, man. Like, he can't ever say, you guys didn't give me a chance. Like, he pissed away chances. He slapped people in the face with some of the with the benefit of the doubt that he squandered. But with that, I mean, nobody's perfect. So I still say he's one of the greatest ever. And I definitely think him and Stylebender need to fight before it's all said and done.
yeah. I don't know if you saw recently, he and Stylebender actually met up and kind of made amends over everything. What's interesting with John Jones, and really a lot of these guys, Conor McGregor falls into this as well, where they are, what makes them great and what makes them tick mentally also can be their downfall. And how do you draw the line? Where do you draw the line? I mean, being a fighter in a cage, Chael Sonnen says this. He says it to like jokingly, but it's true. If you're willing to get down to your underwear in front of millions of people and fight another human being, there is something mentally that you are willing to go through and also makes you different than 99.9% of the population. And so when you see fighters like a John Jones or Conor McGregor, and you get these video clips where they're making bad decisions, strung out on coke, whatever, can you be that surprised? I mean, can you really be that surprised? It's hard. It's hard to do what they do. It's a whole different ball game that we can't even understand or begin to understand. So it shouldn't shock you when you see those things happen. As far as John Jones style bender fighting, I mean, I think that ship's probably sailed. John Jones has put on so much weight to make this heavyweight limit, and style bender, naturally his frame is very slender. We saw it when he tried to go up to 205. He couldn't even get to 205. He couldn't even weigh in at 205. And that was rumored to have eaten a lot of food before he got on that scale to try to even get close to 205. Probably went into that fight at 198 and is fighting a man who was 230 the night of. So style bender is just a little bit too small, unfortunately, I think, to make that fight happen, especially now. But skill set for skill set, style for style, that would have been a fun one, no doubt about it. You're muted. I can't hear you. There we go.
The Paul brothers and how they've managed to kind of change the landscape as far as getting people to fight and advertising for fights and creating a lot of money for people on undercards. So much so that kind of what they did influenced, Francis and Tyson Fury fighting.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what do you feel like their impact is on combat sports? And do you think that's become a good thing for UFC? Because if these influencers who clearly aren't skilled to the level of guys they're fighting are getting insane pay-per-views, like, how do you think that helps or hurts UFC and just combat sports in general?
Man, I've got to imagine that it helps. And I don't know if there's a correlation there. I'm certainly not going to give influencer boxing or the Paul brothers credit for this happening fully. But it is interesting timing where boxing before the influencer side of things happened was almost impossible to get big time fighters to fight each other. And over the course of this year, we are getting mega fight after mega fight after mega fight in boxing. We've got another one coming up the 29th. We've got Errol Spence versus Bud Crawford. It's going to be a hell of a fight. Looking forward to that one. You already saw two other mega fights essentially happen just a couple months ago. So I don't know what the correlation is there, but I got to imagine there's some sort of influence that's coming from the content creator boxing side of things. There's some sort of influence coming from a guy like Jake Paul and what they're doing there. So I think overall it's probably good for combat sports. I mean, it's entertainment at the end of the day. If it wasn't entertainment, we wouldn't even hear of a Mark Zuckerberg versus Elon Musk fight happening potentially in the UFC. Like, that's a joke. Those things should never happen. CM Punk should have never had a pro fight in the UFC.
Facts.
But it's entertainment, and we're here to be entertained. And if people want to see it, then they're going to do it. And, sure, it certainly can be a sideshow thing. But reality is, the man who started it, or the men who started it, we can go all the way back to Randy Couture versus James Toney. When James Toney came over to the UFC, that was a crossover. And then Conor McGregor versus Floyd Mayweather. That was, talk about a fight build up and the way they were able to put that together. That was game changing as well. And so I think you have things like that happen that lay the groundwork. You have somebody who knows how to entertain in Jake Paul coming from the YouTube side, takes a little bit of the shtick of some of the great fighters like a Conor McGregor himself and knows how to parlay that into getting eyes to watch him. And let's give him credit also. He may not be the best boxer in the world, but he certainly does train hard and he certainly does want to try to be good at this. So, yeah, I think overall, long-winded answer, I think Jake Paul's good for boxing. I do, in combat sports.
Excellent. I appreciate all your time, Jesse. I thank you. Go ahead, shout out your socials, everywhere people can find you and follow you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me on, man. I really appreciate it. I had a blast. Conversation was free flowing, easy. I think you did a great job getting from topic to topic seamlessly. So appreciate you. Make sure that you tap in here and stick around with Kenneth and what he's got going on going forward. For myself, you can check me out on YouTube, Last Second Sports. Just type that in, be the first channel that pops up. You can sub over there if you want 49er content. Got a second channel, Last Second Sports 2, where you can check out all NFL content. And then you can find me on Twitter at jnay_LSS.
Fantastic, man. Thank you for everything. And we'll see what happens this season. Have a good night.
You too, man. Later.
Peace.